Eliza Jane asked me to speak to you guys. This is Boyce Political Society, by the way, if you're not here or aware. And to choose a statesman, political philosopher, individual who has kind of shaped our mind or shaped my mind and shaped how I think. So I chose Jesus. So if you'll open your Bibles to Matthew chapter. Just kidding. Although that is true. No, I chose Calvin. That's also a lie. I didn't choose that. Okay. The real person I chose is Sir Roger Scruton. So Sir Roger Scruton died 4 years ago. I actually wrote 2 obituaries for him for the ERLC and for the Gospel Coalition when he passed away. So what I want to try to do in the little bit or in the time that we have is I want to spend a few minutes, 20, 25 minutes kind of filling out who he was, why he meant so much to me, why I think if you're not too familiar with him, you should become very familiar with him, even posthumously become familiar with him. His posthumous reality, not yours. Anyways, okay, sorry. It's Friday afternoon, so there's going to be some verbal confusions. And why I think he is a voice that should be in your mind, especially if you find yourself interested in or have curiosities with respect to political conservatism, and why I think he should be one of the primary voices in your mind rather than current offerings. And I'll just sort of try to speak generally with respect to that because this is recorded. And so I'll try to speak generally. You probably know the targets I'm after, but I'll not speak in specificities with respect to that. And then we'll have time for Q&A. I'm assuming questions that you might have. I want to leave. Excuse me. I want to leave time for that. I want to leave space for that. So give me 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes or so to talk about Sir Roger Scruton, what he means to me, why it matters, and then we can dive into questions. Does that sound like a deal for the next little bit? Okay. And Siri's going to try to turn on here in a minute eventually. Okay, so Roger Scruton was an Englishman born in 1944, passed away January 2020. Grew up like any typical, probably British individual, grew up going to various schools, various largely boys' schools a lot of times, even middle class to upper middle class. This wasn't just for cultural elites. This was a pretty common thing among British educational systems. Grew up doing that, and then went off to college, went off to what they would call something different than college, but what we would call college, and then started working in the late 60s as a doctoral student, I believe, or at least I think around that time, as a doctoral student at Cambridge, and he had a friend that he went to visit in France in 1968. There were riots in 1968 in what was called, I believe, the Latin Quarter of Paris, or just the area inside of Paris that was largely Latino and was largely revolting against something, not entirely sure what it was. Up to this point, he would have self-identified as someone really considered, he would have considered himself largely leftist, or would have considered himself sympathetic towards Marxism or Marxist socialist thought. This would have been a very attractive thing for young academics and elites and those who were in those kinds of institutional norms in the late 60s especially. And he went to Paris in 1968 and saw student protests, and what he saw changed his mind. He saw students overturning cars, students destroying property, students making barricades out of the cars they turned over, and taking up pieces of the road, cobblestone pieces of the road, and throwing it at law enforcement or police officers at the time. And he gives this interview, I think it was in 2013 or 2014, with a magazine called The Prospect. And he articulates this, and he says this is a quote. "I suddenly realized I was on the other side. When I saw an unruly mob of self-indulgent middle-class hooligans. When I asked my friends what they wanted, what they were trying to achieve, all I got was this ludicrous Marxist gobbledygook. I was disgusted by it and thought there must be a way back to the defense of Western civilization against these things. That's when I became a conservative. I knew I wanted to conserve things rather than to pull them down." So it was this tangible expression that he saw. It wasn't his classrooms. It wasn't the protests, the peaceful protests for Pinochet or whatever it was that he probably saw in Cambridge and London as he grew up, or even in his college times. It was a tangible expression of the philosophical, political philosophy that was quite literally tearing down the places around them, both intellectually but also materially tearing them down as well. That changed his mind. And he never looked back. And in doing so, he became not, and these are going to be important differences, he did not become what's called a controversialist. He did not become a polemicist. He took his ideas and learned how to write them in a way that was persuasive, which is different than polemic. Okay, I'm going to draw that out. If you have questions about that, we can draw it out in the Q&A. Okay, it's going to be relevant, especially for what I'm going to suggest is not a pathway forward today for conservatives. So he does not become reactionist. He did not become cynical. He became honest about what he saw, and he became realist about what he saw. But he didn't let it collapse into a kind of despair and cynicism that sometimes will produce a sharp tongue and a sharp word that is hiding frustration that they can't fully articulate. So when it's articulated as sarcasm, or it's articulated as rhetorical flourishes that land really well, but they don't actually have much of substance. Okay? He doesn't become a cynical, and he doesn't become reactionist. I encountered Roger Scruton in my PhD studies. I didn't know he existed until I read his book on beauty in an aesthetics doctoral seminar. That was my first encounter with Roger Scruton, was beauty. That's a lot of people's first encounter with Sir Roger Scruton. Unless you were English and you were center-left and you read the newspaper, then you probably didn't like him because he was an opinion writer and had op-eds that he would frequently write, or punch pieces that he would write in the Daily Sun or in and others. He created his own magazine. He created his own journal. He was a prolific writer. He developed underground, almost academic universities and cohorts in communist and socialist countries to understand why you should fight against them, and not fight against them the way that they are fighting against you, but with better and truer and more beautiful tools and swords. Okay, so here's the pathway I want to take. I want to give you 4 ways in which he has shaped my life, and I'm going to suggest to you that these are 4 paths you should consider as well, okay? And that you should at least entertain the possibility that current offerings within the confines of conservatism are failing miserably at each of these. And in doing so, opening your eyes a little bit to the current moment and to retrieve the tradition that was given to you, that current offerings have had no right to manipulate the way they have, and to tell you to kindly reject those voices. Okay? Deal? Let's start this way. It's difficult for me, truthfully, to try to separate where my mind starts and his ends when it comes to conservatism. I cut my political teeth in the early and mid 2000s, which was largely a high-minded time of what was categorized then, but is now really known as a kind of neoconservatism, where it is a really stridently driven around foreign policy, around cutting taxes, and around faith-driven, family values language. When I was in college, I canvassed neighborhoods for Bush Cheney in 2004. I was scheduled to go to the RNC in 2004 as part of one of my classes, to go as one of the helpers to the delegacy, the Kentucky delegacy that was going to solidify the delegates to give to the nominee, President Bush in 2004. I wasn't able to go, so I wasn't actually able to go to the convention to do that. I got sick. But my pathway, starting in college, was into politics before it was into anything else. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to go into politics. I didn't want to serve as a senator or congressman. I don't have the stomach for that, nor the people skills, nor the speaking skills, nor the desire. But I wanted to work in Congress, and I wanted to work on the Hill. I actually wanted to be a speechwriter because the West Wing fundamentally sort of shaped the way I saw the world, not politically, but just the syrupy kind of way in which the speechwriters, I wanted to be a speechwriter because of the West Wing. But then I realized I couldn't write, and I had to find something else. Irony, I know. Okay, so I cut my teeth in the 2000s, early 2000s, with President Bush, with the really significant kind of conservatism that was around from the 80s into the early to mid to late 2000s into the 2010s, really kind of, truthfully, was the predominant movement up until 2012, 2013, and then with the rise of the Tea Party a little before, which was kind of the initial break in the mold, and then there's been other breaks in the mold. Those of you let them hear. And it has just been kind of this continuation of something that's new and destabilized in a really drastic measure. So cutting my teeth there, it wasn't really until the end of college and during seminary that I really started studying the conservative tradition. The readings, the documents, the things that are kind of the canon of conservatism, I didn't really know them. I never studied them. My conservatism was functionally some sort of feature of Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, and some sort of expression that I found in my political science classes. And I didn't really know much else, and didn't know that there was this really deep and rich tradition of literature from Edmund Burke to Michael Oakeshott to Russell Kirk to T.S. Eliot and to a host of others who would be considered conservatives, would be considered conservatives, or would have shaped the tradition of conservatism in a way that I didn't know existed in any way, shape, or form. And so I began working my way back. So I started contemporary and moved back rather than starting old and moving to the front, like I tell my students to do. So do as I say, not as I did. So if you're in one of my classes. So I started with Roger Scruton's writings, and I digested everything I possibly could of his writings from the end of my undergraduate through seminary and through my PhD, or at least what I had known of it once I first encountered him in my doctoral studies. When I first encountered him in my doctoral studies, I started making my way back and just started ingesting as much as I could of the conservative tradition. If Scruton mentioned somebody, I went to pick him up. I didn't know who Matthew Arnold was, but I went back and read Matthew Arnold, or at least sections of him on culture. It's not that great, but if he quotes it, then I'm going to go find it. When Scruton says that Matthew Arnold says truth is a very good horse to ride, but to ride somewhere, I want to go find that quote that Arnold says that. So I go find it, and then I read sections of Arnold. And then when Arnold quotes Shakespeare or he quotes somebody else, I go find that, and you just end up quote hunting and mine hunting and source hunting until you find yourself a couple of years later reading and digesting and ingesting stuff that you would have never found otherwise. So I learned through Roger Scruton the conservative tradition. And what I learned most fundamentally is that the conservative tradition is, at its core, a posture. It's not a politic. It's an attitude. It's not actionable legislative items. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not actionable legislative items and that there is not a politics that one secures. But at its core, conservatism is a posture. It's not a politic. It's a way in which you orient yourself with the world and the way in which you present what you love and how you defend and cherish it, more than it is a list of judges, justices, and legislative items and action items for the next election. That's a piece. But when the piece becomes the core gets rotten real fast. Okay? Everyone tracking with this so far? Okay. I don't do lectures without some kind of class. This just has to be like a class, so just deal with it, okay? So, it's a posture before it's a politic. Conservatism is unique in this sense, in that its counterpart, progressivism, not liberalism, progressivism, its counterpart is a politic before it's a posture. because the posture has been taken over by the political. The programs, the actionable items are fundamentally what it's meant to be for. There's a vision of history that's attached to this, yes. But where is the history substantiated? It's substantiated through policies and through politics. Conservatism is a view I'm going to suggest to you because Scruton suggested it to me, and this is, I think, correct. To view politics from a broader lens than just merely legislative and political processes. That the least interesting and least important part of conservatism is what policies you prefer over another. That's the most boring part of it, truthfully. But that becomes the most exciting part. Why? Because it's the easiest one to implement, and it's the easiest one to see in front of your face, but it's not the one that has the formative powers that shape you and so shape others and so shape a society and so shape beauty, goodness, and truth and tradition. So, it's a recognition that in spite of frailties, of failures, of mistakes, that there are good things worth preserving and defending, that you have been given something that you don't have a right to manipulate and change, that you are given as a legatee, as a steward to give to others, and you don't have a right to borrow from the future to make the present better, and that you don't have a right to act as if the past is no longer important just because you think the present demands something different. That is what France did. That's what the French Revolution did. And that's what conservatism began its primary intellectual tradition with Edmund Burke in the Reflections on the Revolution in France and in his letters on a regicide peace. It's both of those. And in those, he speaks of those individuals, the French revolutionaries and those who would support them, as people who, and this is exactly how he describes it verbatim, that they, meaning the French revolutionaries, have made a schism with the entire universe. They've made a schism with the whole universe. Now, what's meant to signify that? It's meant to say that something has been given to them that they no longer care about, or that they think that they can handle it better than what came before them. Some people may call that chronological snobbery. One particular person might call something like that chronological snobbery. And that they think that the future has to be drawn into the present to such a degree that the goods of the future are borrowed for the hope of the present. But Burke, and so Scruton, says this, that a contract in society is not a contract between just the living individuals, as if the future and the past don't matter. A contract is between the living, the dead, and the yet to be born. That's the legacy. And that is what I would suggest to you is the heartbeat of the conservative tradition. And that's why it's a posture before it's a politic. Because you have to defend what you love before you can articulate what you love. Even if you know what it is, you have to be able to be willing to defend it. And how you defend it matters as much as that you defend it. Why? Because it's a posture, not just a politic. Okay? So, conservatism. He says this is in his book, How to Be a Conservative. Conservatism starts from the sentiment that all people, or he says all mature people, readily share. That good things are easily destroyed, but not easily created. Okay, I'm going to read that again. Conservatism starts from a sentiment that all mature people can readily share. The sentiment that good things are easily destroyed, but not easily created. This is especially true, this is him continuing. This is especially true of good things that come to us as collective assets. That is to say, given to us to hold, assets to hold, to give to something else. Peace, freedom, law, civility, public spirit, the security of property and family life, and all of life which we depend on the cooperation of others while having no means single-handedly to obtain it. You depend on others, both now and those who came before you, to hold what it is you value most. You are not a man on an island, and you are not a societal and cultural person on an island, and you don't have the ability, you don't have the freedom. You have the freedom, but you are misusing it to exert yourself into the confines of society without recognizing what came before you, what has been inherited by you, and what's meant to be cared and stewarded to pass on to others. The work of destruction, he says, is quick, easy, and exhilarating. The work of creation is slow, laborious, and dull. I would add, it's also true. At the work of destruction, I would add this. The work of destruction is quick, easy, exhilarating, and false. The work of creation is slow, laborious, and dull, yet true. So, the conservatism that I knew, that I cut my teeth on, and that is generally kind of the air that is breathed, at least in American political conservatism, is not ready or willing to do long, slow, laborious work of creating good things. They're interested in revenge. They're interested in resentment. They're interested in facilitating and cultivating revenge and resentment. And they're interested fundamentally in manipulating the current moment by borrowing from the future to such a degree that what is given to us no longer looks like what we have. Because they don't care enough, because their vision is stunted by politics instead of a posture. So in many ways, it asks you to short circuit a process to focus on policies and to focus on politics. I will suggest to you, this is still conservatism, that Scruton offers a different path, paved by those who've gone before us and have left breadcrumbs of goodness and truth and beauty along the way. Along this path that we walk looking for these, the focus is on recognizing that before we shape politics, we shape ourselves by how we pursue our politics. It's a posture, not a politic. Conservatism is not a project. It's not a politic. It's a posture. That's the paradigm shift he offered for me. And it freed me from angst, anxiety, and frustration about current moments, about current fears, about current societal directions that need to be leveled to the ground, because if we don't, then we're looking at some sort of proto-totalitarian regime of some form, or whatever angst and populist rhetoric is wanting to get you to act without thinking first. Just follow. Love your people, love your place. Realize they are not projects, they are not politics. They're people, and it's a posture. So that's the first, conservatism. Shaped my view of conservatism. Second, beauty. This was my first encounter with Scruton, but it is also perhaps the one that has shaped me maybe more than anything else. I learned very quickly that we are starved for beauty in modern society, but more than anything else, we crave it. It's not that we're simply starved and we don't care. We crave it. We desire it. There's something deeply embedded in us as creatures, as created creatures. That's a tautology, but you get my point. If we want to take it in a particular Christian flavor, we are image bearers of a God who is creative and who has displayed his creativity in the cosmos, in the moral law, and in nature. So beauty becomes a pathway to seeing the world differently, seeing yourself differently, and being shaped by something that extends beyond the current moment. It shapes you because it's meant to. That there are things in life, this is part of what Scruton taught me, that there are things in life that go beyond political horizons, that shape political horizons, that to forget them or to push them aside because the current moment has some pressing issue that needs to be dealt with is actually stunting the possibility of those things being dealt with properly. You may be able to pass a law, but you haven't done anything to shape a common good of a community if you don't love beauty. And so not loving truth, and also not loving goodness. So Scruton shaped my notion of beauty, my understanding of beauty, my love for beauty by helping me see that we long for it, we crave it, we shape our lives around it. If we have malformed notions of beauty, if we have malformed notions of what it means to love beauty, to pursue beauty, then we will pursue malformed notions of truth. We will pursue malformed notions of goodness, and we will shape policies and politics and postures and communities around these malformed notions. And we will build brutalist architecture. And we will pretend like someone standing in front of a canvas and splashing paint on it is profound and an expression of something deep and meaningful other than just what my child does, except now it's sold for millions of dollars. What that means is there's something about beauty that draws us, and in drawing us, draws our eyes outside the current horizons. Not always up, but out and beyond the current horizons. That there's something that draws it, something that holds it, something that keeps it, something that helps us see that there's a light in the distance. We're not quite sure if it's a fire or if it's a train coming, but there's a light in the distance and I'm drawn towards it. And truth helps me see that's a fire, not a train, right? And that the fire is to hold me, or not hold me, to warm me by the goodness of its heat. Does this make sense? Right? That's what these do together when they are working in unison with one another and informing a people that says this is the way and this is not the way. And what it also does, and what Scruton opened my eyes to, is that beauty is present in politics either by its acceptance or its rejection. Let me give you a tangible example of this. Anyone who advocates for a policy of any kind has underneath it a notion of a good life. That if this is passed, life is better, society is better, people are better with this than not this. What is that? That's saying that life, when formed around this notion, is more true than when it's not formed around this notion. Life has more goods to give and share when life is formed around this law which protects something as opposed to when it's not. You might say life is more beautiful when this is present in society or when this is present in society. Now, what this is may actually be quite ugly and vicious, but they still see this as a more beautiful life that they're pursuing. Does this make sense? Right? So Scruton opened my eyes to beauty. For the first time in my life, I grew up in a small Kentucky town. It's beautiful in its own sense, but I didn't understand. I mean, I liked music, but I didn't understand music. I didn't understand art. I didn't understand architecture. It just all seemed kind of the same to me, or highfalutin class people who lived in Louisville that I didn't understand, right, or whatnot. And now I live here, so don't believe me. The irony is not lost on me every time I realize my address is Louisville, Kentucky. So he opened my eyes to conservatism. Or excuse me, Scruton opened my eyes to beauty and its relationship to conservatism, and to recognize that conservatism is one of really the last ideological is the wrong word, ways of living in the world that recognizes the relationship of beauty and politics. That the moral order and the order of beauty are actually, they work together. That if you believe in objective beauty, the parallel to this is to believe in objective morality. And the conflict, there is no conflict between the two. Subjective beauty renders subjective morality and vice versa. And the flip side of that is also true. Okay, so conservatism, beauty, patience. I am aware of the fruits of the Spirit. I am aware of 1 Corinthians 13. But I can promise you that for me, a notion of patience and a patient posture didn't land with substantial force until I read Roger Scruton. Because he demonstrated to me in the way he writes, He demonstrated to me in the way he operated in his writings. He demonstrated in the way in which he ordered himself around ideas that are fundamentally impatient, that you don't have to fight fire with fire. You can actually put the fire out, or perhaps wait for someone better to put the fire out, but let people know not to go this direction because there's a fire that way. Okay? I'm not going to try to extend the metaphor any further. But patience, especially with respect to culture and politics and political realities, is a fundamental long game. And it's meant to be played that way. It doesn't mean that you don't worry about current stopgaps and current problems. And if you want to think of it like, plugging holes in the boat so it doesn't sink, that's good and right. But at some point, you got to take the boat out of the water and take it to the shop to fix it. And it might take some time. And the craft of fixing the boat matters as much as putting the boat back in the water. Does that make sense? That matters as much, if not more. So time demands that we be patient. I thought I had notes here. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Oh, here we go, yeah. Okay. That when we live in a current moment of rage, of change, of endlessly searching for resentment, like the meme that comes around every once in a while of someone saying, I don't like oranges, and then there's an Instagram comment saying, oh, are you like judging all oranges? And I guess or I don't like pineapples. Well, I guess you hate oranges. It's just sort of like, no, I just don't like pineapples. It has nothing to do with oranges. I just don't like pineapples. Or the walrus one. Do you guys know the walrus meme? If I had it, I'd show it here. It's really good. I'm just going to stop there. The necessity of patience requires that you consider how change occurs and how fast it needs to occur. Conservatism rightfully understands that proper political change requires stability. Not suggests, not prefers, requires stability. It requires you to consider the possibility that the actions you're going to take are going to have consequences that you need to consider. Doesn't mean you don't make them, but you consider them. That if there's a right secured and you're wanting to take it away and it produces instability, you should probably think long and hard about what that looks like and not just go, well, we're doing the right thing. You might be, but you might also be causing anarchy when you do. Have you thought about that? Or do you just want to own the libs so bad you don't want to think about it? The conservative can champion progress, but the movement is guided by prudence and patience and wisdom. Progress for the mere sake of progress, or progress that just mirrors contemporary social norms, is wrong. That means how you go about securing what you see as good matters as much as what you secure as good. If your reaction to something is to do the same thing but for better reasons, you're a mirrored reaction to what it is you despise. You despise that thing, you're more like it than you want to admit. Just own it and then move differently. To do something and to do it well requires the necessity of slowing down. Patient reflection, sober judgments, considering alternative views, perspectives, and recognizing that time is not wasted by this, but that you are building something beautiful, slow, laboriously, and dull. Both culturally and politically, the impulse is towards expressing resentment first and then finding solutions to justify the resentment. If that continues, there will be a whole lot that is said, but very little settled. I think that's the air we breathe. Roger Scruton taught me that patience speaks to the current climate by suggesting the way forward is to understand the past, that rage, resentment, revenge, and a series of other things may build movements, but they cannot sustain people, and they do not secure political goods, and they do not build institutions. They destroy them. Patience speaks a better word. Last one, and we're done. Home. Beauty, conservatism, patience, and home. Until my 30s, I had a love-hate relationship with the fact that my blood runs deep with Kentucky soil. And by that I mean, I cannot remember a time, and our family tree is hard to find a time where a Baise was not, and most Baises were not, residing in and around Kentucky almost entirely as farmers in some way, shape, or form, or moonshine bootleggers, one of the two, sometimes simultaneously. Okay, my great-grandfather and my great-grandfather were moonshine bootleggers, from what we can tell. But Scruton taught me a new word, oikophilia. Oikophilia. I think he actually coined it. It's called oikophilia is love of home. He takes two words that are different and puts them together. Love of home. Modern political philosophies, influenced as they are by, if we want to use Carl Trueman's very right language, expressive individualism, from the rise and triumph of the modern self. I always want to say rise and fall of the modern self because of the podcast of the rise and fall of Mars Hill. It's not the same thing. They can force a person to feel as if they're homeless. And by homeless, I mean they don't feel settled, they don't feel like they have a people and a place and a culture. Or if they do, they're being asked to reject it or deny it or hold it in some kind of tension that doesn't allow them to feel it in the depths of who they are. By homeless, we obviously do not mean literally homeless here. It's describing what you might call a phenomenological, existential, psychological relationship with the places that have shaped you and made you. Being from particular places, being from particular spaces, you have what Wendell Berry calls a membership and a history. And you can't escape it. It's made you, whether you want to admit it or not, whether you like it or not. It's made you. Scruton allowed me to look at that and go, that's okay. And in fact, that's good. Because it places me in a place with a people that are worth knowing and loving and protecting. We love our homes because they are reflections of us and what they are. This is good and right. This stimulates a sense of shared obligation, a sense of a love of home. Scruton taught me that oikophilia attaches humanity to creation around them. We are creatures like the rest of creation, but a unique creation, but not so fundamentally distinct that we are not attached to tangible people and places in created order, and that those things don't call to us in some kind of manner because of how we were formed and shaped. Conservatism does this without even really thinking about the fact that they are doing it. Because deep down, their postures have been developed to such a degree that they recognize that these things are who they are. Doesn't mean they stay this way, but they are who they are. This caused me to care more about my surroundings. It caused me to care more about the natural world. It caused me to care about the environment. It caused me to care about the ways in which the environment has harmed or caused problems to my people in place, or to a people and a place. What we term creation care is in fact a deeply conservative value. The conservative tradition is more environmentalist than the progressive liberal tradition is. Traditionally, it is. So instead of employing the apocalyptic zeitgeist today, how much more compelling would it be to say that a conservative case for nature is good because it is the spaces and places where we are situated in the broader created order, where it speaks to us. We care for the natural world because it is the space we all inhabit. It is our home. We don't stand above nature in domination. We seek to reorient it because it's ours to care for. It's our Father's world. And in doing so, we preserve and hold and keep and pass on to what comes to us something better than what was given to us. And to me, that's really at the core, that's conservatism. Is I do not have the right to manipulate and dominate what was given to me and so fundamentally change it that it is unrecognizable to myself or to my peers, such that when I hand it off to others, it is so fundamentally unrecognizable even more that it is the worst possible expression of cultural telephone that you could have, which is whatever was said here and whatever is said over here 10 generations later have nothing to do with each other. That's a failure more than a success. Progress and progressivism will tell you that's a success. Conservatism tells you to slow down and stop, and to be patient, to love your home, to love beauty, and that being a conservative is about a posture. It's not about a politic. It's about if we want to use a German word, it's about a Lebenswelt, a way of living, as opposed to legislative means and measures. Thank you.